Hello, I'm Toby. A friend has chosen a Doctor Who story for me to watch, and we both have to choose our favourite things about it, but I won't know what they've chosen till the end. Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a Doctor Who episode commentary podcast with me, Toby Haydock.
Hi Toby, it's Simon Guerrier here. I've chosen for you The Evil of the Daleks from 1967.
Okay, I'm not playing this time, well, apart from the episode, so press play on Evil of the Daleks, episode 6, in 3, 2, 1. Now then, this will mean nothing to you, those of you who are listening, but those of you who are viewing may go, hang on, he's got changed, and he looks a bit older. No, I mean, hopefully I don't. And episode 7 will be back to the night that I did Evil of the Daleks. I would like to say there was a technical problem with my recording of episode 6 of Evil of the Daleks, which starts with the game of trains, which I think is brilliant. It is a rather amusing little game. Unfortunately, the commentary, when I listened back to it, was neither amusing nor informative. I have a habit, I think, and we'll watch this as a verbal tick. If I say, yeah, and that's interesting because that means I'm buying myself a bit of time to say something. And in the case of episode 6, to say something that wasn't remotely interesting at all, quite a lot. So when I was reviewing it for technical reasons, largely, because I don't like listening to the sound of my own voice, although this may sound contrary to what this whole exercise is about, but my own voice to me sounds like nails on a blackboard, scratching out the words, you sound like a git. But that's one thing. But actually, I kept saying, this is really interesting, and then saying the least interesting things possible for 25 minutes. So I've done the unprecedented thing. Unprecedented, this is only the 5th story I've done of re-recording this episode. If Doctor Who has a history of re-recording things that haven't worked very well. So that's a bit of context to why, for the video, I look a bit different. The listener would be completely unaware, but you'd have been aware of the original episode 6. It was really tedious. Unlike episode 6 of Evil of the Daleks, which starts brilliantly. And I love this, and I've talked through it, and it's a shame. But hopefully that giving you that context was important, and we can catch up now, because this is the Daleks playing trains. This is an absolutely brilliant idea. These Alpha, Beta, Omega. Well, one, it gives us a brilliant anecdote from Roy Skelton that he often trotted out, which was when he was Beta, he had a line to say something like, Alpha, what is happening, or some such. And instead he said, what's it all about, Alpha? Which apparently made some people laugh and some people cross. But depending on how he was framing the anecdote. But it's a great story and a good line and a good gag. The idea that the Daleks, who have been played by school kids in the playground, generations of school kids in the playground, the idea of giving that to the Daleks to do is a wonderful, grotesque parody of the influence that they had on children, and now the very children that they have influenced dictate the way that these humanized, infantilized Daleks speak, which I think is really creepy. It's a really interesting idea. Apparently Terry Nation didn't like the idea at all. He saw them as cold, purely evil creatures of menace. But a great way to make that really spooky and really creepy, is to upend it. It's to turn it on its head. The gas mask child is another, a sort of, a parody of childhood, is a terrifying thing because we equate childhood with innocence, and we equate the Daleks with, cold extermination. So to hear them speaking in that childish way is quite charming, but then when you think about it, it's very unnerving. And I like Terry Nation. I like his sort of comic strippy sort of approach to writing that he does, and he does sort of these great epic space adventure type things. But I think David Whittaker really knew how to do really interesting things with the Daleks. And Terry Nation, dare I say it, if he didn't like the evil of the Daleks, the humanized Daleks, I think he... and it's possible to create something and then to get it wrong. I think he misunderstood an important element of his creations, and none of us are immune to that. I've run a comedy club for 23 years. I resisted some of the booking policies of it when some other people started to help me with it work there. And actually I had to eventually realise that I was wrong, and that these things that were being done actually gave it a new lease of life and helped with its longevity. So just because you come up with something doesn't mean you necessarily know the best way to handle it. That's all I would say when it seems counterintuitive to say the man who created the Daleks perhaps didn't always get what worked best about them. I think David Whittaker, what he does with the Daleks makes them much more interesting. They're so cunning in power of the Daleks, and then here he takes everything that we know about them, and well, for certainly these three Daleks, and he has them playing trains, which I don't think I ever played trains, but it's obviously it's a sort of playground game, and that's a wonderful thing to do. This is, Maxtable has some odd moments in this episode that I'm not sure I've quite got my head round. The other thing that I've been able to do, because I've revisited this, I do like the dynamic between these two characters. They both go on a bit of a journey. I think Maxtable might go on a journey to Hamville, but I don't know. Goring was a good actor, and I think he gives it all he can. And actually, Maxtable is absurd. He thinks you can turn base metal into gold, and that the Daleks will help him with that. And there's this lovely wounded dignity to John Bailey's Waterfield. Ooh, and they have a bit of a scrap. Oh yes, he shouts murder a lot, I seem to recall. I wonder what this scene would have looked like. I've no idea. But what I didn't talk about throughout the whole of the commentary was I alluded to the fact that this was repeated, but I never mentioned that when this was repeated after episode 1 of The Wheel in Space, he's got scary eyes. There's a voiceover in episode 1. So the version that I heard, the soundtrack I had, was I'm talking through Maxtable going a bit bonkers here. He was a good enough actor to get away with it. He was also a rich enough actor to have given it quite a lot, and it does sound like he's giving it quite a lot. He shouts murder, murder, murder quite a lot, and then he shouts doctor, doctor, doctor quite a lot. But he has got a nice travelling bag. It's an old medical leather case. I like that. So Evil of the Daleks episode 1, the one that I had the soundtrack, is the one with the voiceover from Patrick Troughton and Wendy Padbury. So she says something like, so what are these Dalek things? And he goes, oh, well, they don't come into it yet. Because, of course, he says, I'll weave, at the end of Wheel in Space, says, I'm going to weave this into a story for you. So, and I think I mentioned before that, yes, the idea that his life is a series of television adventures. On episode 1 of my holiday, I enjoyed some sightseeing. But just before the commercial break of my meal, But so it's weaved into the continuity. The repeat is not just, it's not just at the end of Wheel in Space that he goes, here's a clip from Evil the Daleks, and then it's just on telly next week. Actually, the following week, they went to the effort of having a voiceover from Troughton and Wendy Padbury to weave it into the narrative, at the end of Wheel in Space, and to act as a segue between that and Dominators, which starts with Zoe going, "Oh, I don't like them Daleks." So that's a really unusual thing. It's sort of like, it's a bit like a clip show now, where an episode of a series will go, "Do you remember when we did that thing?" And then there's a 5-minute clip of them doing that thing, which was just a previous episode. Well, we had a 7-week story, and quite right too. It's glorious. So yes, the verbal tick we need to look for me, as well as saying verisimilitude and beguiled, is that if I go, yeah, it's interesting, because that means I don't really think it's interesting. I'm just trying to think of something interesting to say, which is odd, because this is the explosion of the house. This is a massive moment. This is where we've spent a story's worth, really, of adventure with Terrell and Ruth and Molly, but in the house. So the idea that we've blown the house up, it's still there. It has a lovely restaurant. And are moving on to the next part of the adventure feels, suitably epic, especially as this takes us to the planet Skaro for the first time since... Oh, she's lovely, isn't she? Since the first story. So I think if you were a young viewer of Doctor Who, this really felt like it was a pretty important development. And I think, and again, Chris Thompson's design, because that's the other thing I didn't really talk about enough in episode 1, is that it's Troughton and Jamie in the swinging 60s. It's an unusual mix, and because not much of this story is set in the 60s, that episode 1 is a thing to be cherished, actually. Troughton and Jamie in the coffee bar with the music, that will have been in itself quite unusual. I know the Faceless Ones is in the 60s, but it's in an airport, so that's the hook. So this is really an epic, but unlike the Chase or the Keys of Marinus, where there's a sort of lot of changes of location, they're sort of quite cursory and broadly drawn sort of episodic interludes, whereas this really feels like they start in one place and there's a mystery, and then they go back in time and it feels like it's going to be this period drum with the Daleks, oddly out of place, and then they start doing this oddly out of place thing. The idea of the Daleks as children I think is gorgeous, but then that adventure is left behind, and the Daleks sort of leave everyone for dead. They want to blow the house up, but we escape with them and come to Skaro, where we first met them, where we haven't been since their first adventure. Also a 7-parter. I do like Kemmel and Victoria have a lovely relationship. I think they're very sweet. Oh, and the model work, yeah, we've got tantalising bits of this model work. And yes, there's quite a lot of it in caves on the cliff face on the edge of the city, which we don't really remember, because we remember the bits in the house, we remember the bits in the Dalek city. It takes quite a lot of time to get there, and what's worth talking about, and the only bit where I think I said anything of much consequence on the first take of this was talking about the Emperor Dalek, where and what I'm going to do is at the end, so to prove that this isn't me cheating so that I can choose a different favourite thing, I'm going to go back in time at the end of this and go back to the original recording, so you can see and hear what I chose the first time I did it. So I'm not revisiting this in order to choose something else. I love the image of Maxtable with his top hat, with his leather medical bag, with that long coat, looking every inch the sort of Victorian gentleman, in a space corridor between two Daleks. Were they mocking him then? He's going, right. And of course, this is because he's a big actor and a big character. The fact that they're completely unflustered by him and in fact were they quite mocking of him then? And quite bullying of him. This is, so on the one hand, we've got the childish Daleks, but on the other hand, they are cruel, they are evil. And none more so than in the way that they treat their, obviously foolish ally. But they're not fazed by him at all. There's no, they can use guile, but when they don't need to, they can just be pretty harsh. Was that what... I need to check that that's what he was doing when he was saying you have no... Right. I'd not forgotten they'd done that. That's really unlike what we see Daleks do normally. I almost want to rewind that and do that again. That is the difficult thing with this, is because I've got to keep it interesting by keeping gab. It means I do run the risk of missing bits, and I'm having to use my prior knowledge of these adventures as I talk through them. Oh, and because this has been recorded after I've released some of my first ones and too much information, my rather fastidious history of episodes of Doctor Who, which take a lot of research and putting together. These tracks I come into the story with what I got in my head and what my friend has said about them, and that's it. So for better or worse, because otherwise I would just spend all of my time revising Doctor Who, and I've got to earn a living. I've got to walk my dog. But yes, the interesting alert, but this is interesting. There's a thing we don't know, or do we? This may have been cleared up. I meant to look at Gavin Rymel's website to give you the address. I might put it as a subtitle and maybe as a post credits thing on the audio to direct you, because he's done so much research about Daleks, and I think there's something about Dalek irises in. Is it this episode where you see a black iris in the Dalek? Oh, there's one where you see a but this is a recreation. Black iris in a Dalek for the first time. But as I say, that's all Gavin's area. But we've discussed, Gavin and I, whether the Emperor Dalek is in the studio. Roger Bunce, who was one of the cameramen on Evil of the Daleks, the CGI recreations of the Dalek City in this reconstruction are great. And I love that set anyway, so they've got good stuff to work from. Whether the Emperor Dalek, who we see at the... Oh, and there's another... Maxtable with his legs crossed, sitting on the floor. That's a really spooky image, bathed in the light, like bathed in a pool of light. That's a really spooky look. And again, we think of this as a sort of battle-hewn epic, but actually it's got some really strange... That mixture of the historical and the futuristic is a clash that is unusual, and it is that great Doctor Who thing. Never mind the Yeti on your loo in Tooting Bec. It's the Yeti on your Victorian loo in Tooting Bec is even better. But Roger Bunce, the cameraman, says that he was disappointed as a studio cameraman. Oh, that's great as well. The Dalek coming out of the darkness. Again, this is just a reconstruction I'm watching, but they've done such good work on it. The Emperor Dalek, I can't see anything. That's really upsetting and unsettling. The Emperor Dalek, according to Roger Bunch, they were... Oh, yes, that's an off... I will get to this point about the Emperor Dalek, but I keep being interested in what's going on, which is good, because the previous take of this, I just said a lot and watched. Believe me, if you think I'm taking a long time to get to the point, I didn't get to a point last time, I don't think, or it took me 22 minutes. But yes, a lot of this happens off screen, so Maxtable's just gone off into the darkness. They used darkness really well with this, so we heard all that screaming and stuff, and Maxtable was off off, and now Victoria's off. She's not in darkness, but she's off camera. So they're using what we can hear, but not see, and that's always terribly scary because your imagination does the work. It's a very nice trick of scripting and direction, that. But listen, Roger Bunce, the cameraman, said that they were disappointed as studio cameramen, because remember, studio cameramen would not have been at the film studios in Ealing, that the Emperor Dalek set was not in the studio. It was, according to Roger, just at Ealing. And if you look at the telesnaps, there's no telesnaps of the Emperor in episode 6. So you can't, because sometimes you can tell from the quality of a telesnap if it's filmed material or if it's the studio. Not always, but you can. There is sometimes a difference in quality. You can tell. But we've got no shot of the Emperor from episode 6. And apparently that starts in darkness and the light blinks on to reveal. That will have been the most amazing thing in Doctor Who ever. I wish we could see that. And if we could, it might clear up whether the Dalek... It's less important, but it's a nice thing to think about as to whether the Dalek Emperor is just on film or not. Now, Gavin suggested to me that there's a publicity shot of Victoria, Deborah Watling, in front of the Emperor where his hosiery is differently placed. The sort of pipes and things coming out of it is differently placed from how it is in the cine footage that we have of the Ealing Film Studios. So that's a suggestion that there's a different set of the Emperor that is in the studio that didn't quite marry with the film. But I've also read that the Victoria photo shoot took place at Ealing, although Gavin suggested, I think it was Gavin, or somebody suggested that because I know Simon Guerrier's looked into this as well, there's a suggestion that Deborah Watling wasn't at Ealing at the same time the Emperor stuff was filmed. Well, she might not have been filming, but there's no reason she might not have been separately called for a photo call. I don't know. There's enough doubt. It may have been solved now definitively, but last time I looked and thought about it, there was enough of an element of doubt that we've got another sort of little Doctor Who mystery to solve. Is the Emperor Dalek in the studio, that brilliant, big, amazing set, or was it just used in film sequences? And the fact that they went to all that trouble to build this amazing prop that is actually, in one episode. And of course there were different props built as well, because they blow one up which is a lighter weight balsa wood one. So then there's the element of, well, what were the pipes on that different to the pipes? So we have different Emperors, we have different filming days. They went back and refilmed extra stuff. So there's enough mystery there. Look, there he is. And he's got the great voice as well. It's the slightly more booming voice. Now, on this recon, we don't get the lights blinking on, but I believe, and he's got those flashing lights along his crown. I think you saw those first, and then the lights came on. We meet at last. I wondered if we ever would. And I just think, I would love to see this. And of course, this ties in with what I was talking about with episode 1 of the Doctor doing all his deduction to actually lead him into a trap. He's been working on the whole human factor thing and the whole Dalek factor thing, this nebulous sciencey thing, and he's gone, aha, but I've got these Daleks, I've given them the human factor, I've done what you wanted me to do, but I've double-crossed you because I've beaten you and I don't care what you do to me now. That's the second Doctor, absolutely. I've done it and you're probably going to do something and I don't care. It's sort of childish, it's obtuse, it's intelligent, it's calculating, but it's also got this weird sort of innocence about the way it is phrased and delivered, this childlike thing. But actually what has happened is the Daleks have the last laugh as far as episode 6 is concerned, because the human factor shows us what the Dalek factor... This is the confident swagger about the science that doesn't really mean anything, human factor and Dalek factor. But the consequence is that your discovery, Doctor, is going to enable us to do the thing that we want to do. So you're partly responsible for this nebulous thing is... oh, and there's the light blinking on the TARDIS. Oh, maybe it was the light blinking on the TARDIS. I may be wrong there. But maybe a lot of things are in darkness and the light comes on. There's a lot of light and dark. And that's the first time we've seen the TARDIS since episode 1 as well. So it really feels like an epic sort of coming together. And that... Oh, and I know... And I'm going to sort of slightly spoilerise the ending because I scrabble for things to choose for episode 7, which, you know, in terms of chronologically, I haven't done yet, but in real life, I have, because this is a re-record of episode 6, is that I don't choose Dudley Simpson's music. And Dudley Simpson does great work throughout most of Doctor Who, but I'm not sure his music's ever one of the best things about the story. He's almost... it's like good lighting in the theatre. It's so good you almost don't notice it. His score for this is epic and discordant, and this perversion of the Doctor Who theme that has the sense of... encroaching doom about it, but also grandeur, and it's a beautiful score. And I don't choose it, and I don't choose it for episode 6 either, because, as I said, I was not going to cheat. I'm going to go back to the past, where I did my original, very boring, quiet at the back. If you think, God, if that one was boring, if judging by this one, if that one was boring, it must be really awful. Look, I wanted to do you a better one than I did, so I've done it again. And at least I... Oh, and the other thing was, I was chomping on a naked bar. And I've got to be careful how I phrase that for the... Because which was fine for the video, but for the audio, it sounded awful because just doing that. And on the video, it looked fine. I was chomping on a naked bar. You've got to watch the grammar there as well, because obviously if I was chomping naked on a bar, that would have been fine for the audio, but awful for the video. But it sounded... So not only was I being boring, I was being boring whilst eating something. And it sounded like... I mean, it could have been doing anything. I could have been noshing off a hamster from what it sounded like. I wasn't. So it was slightly ignorant in the fact that I was chomping away, and also it wasn't very good. So anyway, I hope that was better. Certainly, I don't think was worse. But now we're going to go back in time to the original track that I recorded to prove that I'm not cheating and to show you what I originally chose and would still choose, with honourable mention to Dudley Simpson, as my favourite thing. So by the power of static electricity, I'm going to go into a cupboard over there and travel back in time.
My best thing in episode 6 is the Doctor meeting the Emperor Dalek on Skaro. I wondered if we ever would, says the Doctor, as if I wonder if we ever would, says the Doctor, as if it's been on his mind for a while. And I wonder how the Doctor even knows that there is a Dalek Emperor. Has he been reading the comic strips in TV Century 21? My best thing in episode 7.
Well, we'll have to wait for episode 7. I'm doing well. This is good. I think I've got 3 out of 6. So if I get what Simon chooses for episode 7, I've won. And what does that mean? Well, the rules are about as sort of solid and set in stone as the whole idea about Dalek/human factor. The science of the rules is not entirely fully formed, and what's at stake isn't entirely clear, but it's nonetheless all terribly exciting. I should be going to bed, but I can't bail out now. So this is the end of this episode. You're perfectly welcome to join me for the next one. You might see and hear from me another time, depending on what you're doing with your day/night. But I'm staying up in the inky blackness to see what happens when the Dalek Civil War begins. But for now, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Good night. Simon Guerrier, my guest, is one of those people who, once you've been in his orbit, you crave his company again and again, because he's always fascinating, he's always very good-natured, and he's always terribly enthusiastic, and he works really hard and has therefore produced a number of fabulous entries into the Doctor Who universe, from books to big finishes. Even he's done some documentaries on the DVD range as well. So he's a master of fact and fiction. Thoroughly nice chap too. And he's on Twitter, so check him out. Happy Times and Places was presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest was Simon Guerrier. With sincere thanks to my patrons, John Deere, Ian Key, Jenny at Blue Box 99, Richard Byatt, Paul Carrington, James Gould, Joe Llewellyn, Nathan Moore, Nick Temple, Apollo C. Vermouth, James Blackett, Michael Dennis, Tim Dickinson, Pete Dillon Trenchard, Christopher Joyce, Andy Kitching, Pip Maidley, Russell Parker, Monsieur Poirot, Paul Shields, David Spencer, Sidney Trout, Alistair Wallace, John Williams, Pascal Ziaker, Peter Adamson, Peter Crocker, and Sydney Wilson. Please go to www.tobyhaydock.com for more, and don't forget to rate, thumbs up, and generally be nice about this podcast everywhere you possibly can. It's easy for you, and it helps me, and I'll be very grateful. You can support these podcasts and any other of my broadcasting endeavours at patreon.com/Toby Haydock and kofi.com/Toby Haydock. Patrons get special goodies and advance releases, and of course, my eternal gratitude. Don't forget to subscribe to the official Toby Haydock YouTube channel. Evil of the Daleks is available from the BBC as a narrated soundtrack. Episode 2 is available on DVD as part of the Lost in Time collection.